Okay, continuing on with HTML tutorial number 2, we'd like to actually take a look at the site and say, oh my god, that's so boring. So let's change this. Let's just change the font here. Now I'm going to teach you an old tag. This is called a deprecated tag, which means that they've found a much better way to change fonts now, which is called cascading style sheets. But it's very confusing to learn when you're just starting. So I like using this deprecated tag called the font tag, and it still works. So it isn't like you can't use it on existing web page. It's just that when you get more sophisticated, you will learn a more complicated way to change fonts. But this one is a wonderful tag to teach with. Now, if I just type in font, it actually does nothing. You can see if I reload this, it did nothing. That's because this is the first tag you're going to encounter that actually requires what's called an attribute. Now, the most important thing you can do when you're adding an attribute is add the first character here after the word font, which is a space. If you do not add a space and you just immediately start typing, you're actually just adding to the word that is the tag. You're changing the actual tag name. So you have to put in the space, and then HTML recognize that you're going to put in a tag. Now the first change we're going to make is the size. Okay, now we can change the size of the font simply by typing in size as the attribute and then double quotes. And then we can put in a physical change. Now we could put in a change that's like a fixed number, say like 24. And it would automatically change to a 24 point size. Okay? The challenge with this is we have no idea who is going to be looking at our page and what size monitor they might have. They might have as small as a 9-inch old Mac Classic monitor, or they could have a very large 40-inch screen like I do. Right? So what you want to do, instead of just putting a fixed number right now, we're going to put in a relative change, which is you put in plus, and in this case I'm going to put in +3. And what that does is takes the standard size, whichever you've chosen as your normal viewing size, and just increase it 3 times. So if I save this and go back to here and click reload, you notice that we increase 3 times the size. And now I go back to Smultron, and I can add more attributes. And the only thing that you're required to do to add another attribute is just put in another space. And notice I don't put spaces anywhere else except between the tag and the attribute or between multiple attributes. So the next thing we're going to change is the actual type of font it is. So in this case, we put in face equals, and then in quotes, and then I can choose a font. Now you want to choose a font that is what's called web safe. That is a font that actually exists on everyone else's computer. So Impact is something that's very common on computers. And it's considered a web safe font. If for some reason it doesn't have it and you want to put in an alternate font, you can actually put in comma and then Arial. And that means if it doesn't find Impact, go to Arial. So you actually specify what the alternating font is. Okay? If you put in a font that doesn't exist on the person's computer and they don't have and you don't put in an alternate, it will literally just go to the next alphabetical font, which could be symbolic in nature, and people won't be able to read your pages. So if we do that right now, and I save, and I go back here, and I refresh, I change the font to Impact. Okay, now the last attribute we're going to add is color. And since HTML was actually developed in the United States, color is spelt C-O-L-O-R equals, and then in quotes, and then we can add any color we like. And in this case, I'm going to add Dodger blue. And I like using that particular color just because it's so odd. And it gives you an idea that there are many, many named colors. I believe there are 216 named colors. But you can obviously use a spectrum of colors using hex code as well, which I'll explain later on in these tutorials. Now if I click refresh on here or reload, I change the color. And there we go. And the only other thing I'm going to show you here is on the date, I want you to change change it to bold and italics. And that doesn't happen in the font tag. These are actually separate tags because they're so commonly used. And they're the simplest by far because bold is simply a B. Okay, and I'll put a closing B at the end here. Okay, and that's where it'll stop bolding. And if I click save and I go back to here and I reload, you'll see that the font gets bolded. And if I do italics, it's just simply I. Now this is where I'm going to teach you a little bit about proper nesting. Okay, now if I put a closing I here, which would be wrong, okay, That's called improper nesting, because if you look at it like this, if I draw a line between this I and this I, and then I draw a line between this B and this B, no matter what I do, these lines cross. Okay? What you want to do is you want to be able to connect them on the same side, and then the lines don't cross. So if I move the I here, then if I connected the I's here, I could connect the B's here, and that would be called proper nesting. And that's what you should do. To follow strictly the XHTML standards, you have to have correct nesting. So I'm going to save this file again, and then reload, and there you go. Nice change of font. And I'll stop there, and you can go on to lesson 3.